Okay. Hi, thanks, Maddie. You're right. I think this is why I chose this particular fairy tale. Yeah. I do fall asleep a lot lately. Do I think I'm Snow White? Maybe. Who knows? Um, anyway, how are you? Hope life is kind. Everyone is well. Thank you for waking me up. Um, yeah, it's a worry. It's like, I think the last live I did, I fell asleep. Um, who knew? Who knew that Snow White was actually based upon a real story? Well, I think all of the Grimm's fairy tales were, weren't they? Excuse me for a moment. Just a second. Sorry, I had to sip a cup of coffee. I was worried I might slurp. Um, okay. Find out where I put everything. So life is chaos. Okay, so this German historian named Eckhard Sanders, he claimed he'd uncovered an account that may have inspired a story that inspired what they first appeared in the Grimm's Brothers fairy tales. According to this historian, the character of Snow White is based on the life of Margarita von Waldeck. Great name, by the way. A German countess born to Philip VI and his first wife in 1533. Sorry, my Latin might be seven. Anyway, at the age of 16, Margarita was forced by her stepmother, Katharina of Hatzfeld, to move away to Wildugen in Brussels. There, Margarita fell in love with the prince, as we all do. Oh, God. That's another story. Who would later become Philip II of Spain against the wishes of his father and stepmother. The relationship was, in fact, politically inconvenient, of course. Of course it was. And the girl mysteriously died at the age of 21, apparently having been poisoned. Well, he knew if she ate an apple. But anyway, historical reports indicate the probable instigator of the murder was the King of Spain, who opposed the love story between the son and the girl, and who sent Spanish special agents to kill the young Margarita. Well, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, poison has been used still in the Seven Dwarves. Well, Philip the sixth or seventh owned several copper mines that employed children basically as slaves. These were not only forced to work into inhuman conditions, causing many to die at a young age, but those that survived had severely stunted growth and deformed limbs from malnutrition. How sad is that? And the hard physical labor. As a result, they were often referred to as poor dwarves. And the poison apple again, which comes back into play, according to the writer, is attributable to a historical event that happened in Germany, which saw an elderly man arrested for giving poisoned apples to children who he believed were stealing his fruits. Well, yeah, there you go. I don't know. It's like the Bible, Grimm's fairy tales. It's all history that melds into stories which linger on. There you go. Which leads me on to another. Okay, this is another thing I found. Let me go with this. Oh, this Jordan Peterson on his theory about. Let's go on to Hansel and Gretel. We'll do this. I'm going to go all out on fairy tales. Why not? Before I fall asleep. So share screen. I'll find it now. Probably won't find it. Where are you, Jordan? How is everyone today? It's Sunday here. 20 degrees and a sunny day. And I should be out and about. But medication I'm on at the moment makes me sleepy. Who knows where I'll end up, where I'll be. Oh my goodness. I have to find it. Do you know when you lose something and think, oh my goodness, and then you ransack everything, and you know you didn't lose it, but it's just been hidden by your own self. That's what happens to me. I'm going to find this damn thing. It's the last thing I do. Honestly, I watch a lot of crap. But in the meantime, let's watch this one. Until I find this. Let's watch these forbidden things. Now, let's do it.
Any of these 9 items, check them right away, because they do not just block wealth and prosperity, they can also be the cause of illness, conflicts, and even open the door for misfortune to flood into your home without you even realizing it. Hello, I am Master Lin, a person who has spent more than 30 years studying and applying feng shui into daily life, helping thousands of people remove bad luck.
Who does not want a little bit of feng shui in their life? So yeah, here we go.
Improve their health and attract prosperity. Feng shui is not superstition. It is the science of life energy. And in your home, everything from the layout, lighting, and placement of objects, all of them are energy currents in motion. If you place even one item incorrectly, even something as small as a decorative piece.
See, I would not be placing animal skulls in my house as per se. It's sort of like, no, is it congruent to a Grimm's fairy tale story? Anyway, let's go on.
You might be unknowingly placing an obstructive energy right in the flow of your wealth. In this video, I will reveal to you 9 decorative items that may look beautiful, but are actually highly forbidden. They do not just drain positive energy, leaving you feeling
I do not know why dating ads come up in my search history. I'm not looking to date. Okay, maybe Keanu, but let's keep on talking.
tired and mentally unsettled, but they can also lead to financial decline, weakened health, and slowly cause relationships to fall apart over time. Do not take your eyes off this video, because just by recognizing and changing, you can reignite the flow of good energy and reopen the door of luck for your family. Leave a comment below with the item you suspect might be affecting your home. And if you are interested in living a harmonious and energy-smart life, do not forget to subscribe to Master Lin Feng Shui, so you can receive more practical knowledge to transform your destiny, starting from the smallest changes. So exactly which 9 decorative items are secretly draining your home's energy and inviting bad luck inside? Let us uncover them right now. Number 1. Chaotic and overly complicated wall art. In Feng Shui, every painting or picture on your wall is not just there to add a touch or to fill an empty space as many people think. It is an energy field, a source of visual energy that directly affects the mood perception and even the fortune of the people living in that space. A painting is a mirror of the inner self, and it is also an invisible channel that guides energy. If you choose the wrong one, hang it in the wrong position, or have too many, it will disrupt and block the flow of energy in your home. This is especially true for paintings with dark, gloomy compositions, intense or violent themes, or colors that clash too strongly. They create an unnecessary sense of over-dramatic tension in the room. In Feng Shui terms, this is a sign of positive energy being overpowered by chaotic, stagnant energy. When the mind is not calm, you easily become fatigued and indecisive. In modern life, just one wrong financial decision can have serious consequences, and your money might not be stolen, but it could quietly slip away before you even say goodbye. There is another point. Having too many paintings is like information hoarding. Each painting is a visual signal, and when they bombard you all at once, your mind cannot relax. Imagine sitting in a living room where 5 paintings are all clashing over colors and themes. Can you truly rest? Or do you feel a little irritated the moment you sit down? So how do you fix this? Very simple. Instead of turning your wall into a speed painting gallery, choose just a few pieces that have depth and radiate positive energy. Nature scenes are a safe and effective choice. Trees, rivers, clouds, and skies. These elements help energy flow gently and smoothly through the home. Each time you look at them, it is like breathing in fresh energy through your eyes. Also, paintings with simple compositions and harmonious colors help the mind stay stable, which is extremely important when you are making big life decisions. And remember, expensive paintings are not always better. There are artworks worth thousands that can make your home feel colder in terms of energy, and there are ones worth just a fraction of that which can warm up the whole space because they harmonize with the home's energy flow. True beauty is not in the price tag.
See, I was going to do a whole feng shui thing, but because I can't find that other video. Oh, damn it. I think I found it. So we'll come back to the feng shui. Will we? Yeah, we'll come back to the feng shui because, wow, the feng shui is just amazing. Um, but, oh, all right. I found it. I was prepared. No, I wasn't. I never am. Here we go. BKA.
Exactly what to sell, who to sell to, and how to launch. You can.
Hello, everybody. So, in the past, I have told or read stories for children and offered an analysis. And I recently released a new episode of that sort discussing the Grimm's brothers' Snow White. And people seem pretty happy with that. I'll read you a couple of comments. Can we have a whole psychoanalytic series on fairy tales? So many hidden lessons. It also reminds me of the Peterson lectures I listened to on The Lion King, Peter Pan, and Pinocchio. That was some years ago. Yes, more of these. Please do more of these. All the best from the UK. Story time with Dr. Peterson. Too awesome. Well, the episode proved quite popular and people's responses were very positive, and I like doing narrative analysis. And so we're going to try another one today. Hansel and Gretel. And you all know that story. So we'll see how it goes. Hard by a great forest dwelt a poor woodcutter with his wife and 2 children. The boy was called Hansel and the girl Gretel. He had little to bite and to break, and once, when great scarcity fell on the land, he could no longer procure daily bread. Now, when he thought this over by night in his bed and tossed about in his anxiety, he groaned and said to his wife, more about her in a moment, "What is to become of us? How are we to feed our poor children when we no longer have anything even for ourselves?" Now, you see, there's something troublesome right there already, because his priorities are backwards. He says, when we no longer have anything even for ourselves. Well, a father with his priorities right would be more concerned about his children's hunger than his own. And so the teller of the tale, the writer, the author of the tale, sets up the situation for us with that foolishness. This woodcutter is selfish and, as we'll see, also weak. And that places his children at great risk. How are we to feed our poor children when we no longer have anything even for ourselves? Prioritizing himself first. I'll tell you what, husband, answered the woman. Early tomorrow morning, we will take the children out into the forest to where it is the thickest. There we will light a fire for them and give each of them 1 piece of bread more, and then we'll go to our work and leave them alone. They will not find their way home again, and we shall be rid of them. No, wife, said the man, I will not do that. How can I bear to leave my children alone in the forest? The wild animals would soon come and tear them to pieces. Oh, thou fool, said she, then we must all 4 die of hunger. Thou mayest as well plane the planks for our coffins. And she left him no peace until he consented. But I feel very sorry for the poor children all the same, said the man. Well, there's quite a tale of domestic catastrophe in that opening paragraph, because his wife, who turns out to be the children's stepmother, as we see in the next paragraph, is quite the horrid piece of work. And he doesn't stand up to her. He proclaims that he feels sorry for his children, but he doesn't throw his wife out of the house, which would be approximately the appropriate move under such circumstances, when her proclivity is to not only ensure that she's fed first, which makes her a very bad mother, but also to trick the children, take them to where it's maximally frightening, the darkest part of the forest, leave them there, and then harass her weak husband to death until he agrees. Now, another thing we might give some thought to with this opening is why the poverty exists. And we could feel sorry for the poor woodcutter and his poor new wife, or we could...
I just have to intervene here that I know anyone that knows me knows I love Chinese drama, and that'll be a whole other thing. But in all my Chinese drama been watching, there's a lot of evil stepmothers. So I'm probably there's probably some there's probably been wonderful stepmothers out there throughout time, but yeah, they seem to be proliferate in dramas and story tales. Let's keep on going.
Note very carefully that their poverty might have something to do with their misplaced priorities and their selfishness. So let me give you a counterexample. In the story of Elijah in the Old Testament, Elijah is the first prophet who identifies the voice of conscience with the divine, which is a major psychological transformation, right? Now, Elijah is the enemy of the nature worshippers who are led by an evil queen named Jezebel, who's an arrogant and narcissistic malign foreign influence on the Israelite nation. And she, in her arrogance and haughtiness, brings the nation to ruin, and she persecutes Elijah for his forthrightness and his willingness to stand for the one true God against the nature worshippers, which is something to think about in these most modern of times. In any case, Elijah is running away from Jezebel and her forces after having defeated the worshippers of nature, and God sends him to a poor widow, and who, if I remember correctly, he meets by a well, and she offers to share her remaining food with him. She just has enough flour for one meal for her and her son, and enough flour and oil for one meal for her and her son, but she offers to share it with this stranger, this strange prophet. And then it turns out that if she hits the barrel of flour, more flour appears, and the oil magically refills, so that the prophet and the woman, the widow, the poor widow, and her son subsist on virtually nothing for a very long period of time. And you might ask, well, what does that mean, apart from the, let's say, childish, magical element of it? It means that those who are generous in their attitude, and that might be particularly true of food because human beings share food, are most likely to be provisioned appropriately over the longest period of time. So if you're generous and hospitable, then the probability that you'll stand at the center of a productive and abundant community is radically elevated. Whereas if you're only concerned about yourself and you ensure that you're the one that's fed first, let's say even before your children, then that's reflective of an attitude that's going to do nothing but keep you mired in poverty forever, you and your society. So strangely enough, paradoxically enough, an attitude of generous hospitality and sharing is the best way to facilitate social interaction in such a way that everything becomes abundant. And the wife of the woodcutter is certainly selfish and cruel. And at minimum, the woodcutter himself is a weak pushover. That's very much also reminiscent of the situation with Eve and Adam, because Eve is the primary sinner, let's say, or the initiator of.
Okay. Enough for Hansel and Gretel. We'll get back to that another day. We will keep on with Snow White, I think. Yeah. But few seconds. What's happened? Alright. Everything's gone crazy. Alright. Let's do it.
something somewhat new today. I'm going to read you the Grimm's brothers' version of Snow White. I picked that because I think I have some interesting insights into its meaning, but I also chose it because it's been the target of ideologically oriented rewriting, most famously recently in the case of Disney, who produced what's essentially a very poor movie that was also a commercial flop by carelessly restructuring a story that either the makers of the film didn't understand or understood all too well and decided to mess with for underground reasons of their own. I suspect a little of column A and a little of column B. I'm going to concentrate a fair bit on the figure of the evil queen, not least because there's no shortage of evil queen manifestation in the current social and political environment. And I'm going to draw on a body of research that has been conducted primarily by primatologists, scientists who study non-human primates, given that human beings are primates as well. The field of inquiry is called fertility suppression, and it is the marked tendency of higher status female primates to suppress the probability that subordinates in their group will successfully mate and bring offspring into the world. I think that the evil queen, in no small part, is a reflection of observations of fertility suppression. People started studying fertility suppression in primates because of the observation that in many primate species, dominant females exhibit higher reproductive success compared to their subordinate counterparts. So, one thing you have to understand about social animals, and this is particularly true of primates.
I have to say, wow, I never saw it taking. I have not watched this before. It's my first time. And I did not know that Snow White was about dominant female fertility suppression. Wow. Okay.
Because they're hypersocial. Social animals live in a tiered society, and there are marked differences in the life and success of those who are uppermost in the social hierarchy compared to those who are barely clinging to the bottom, let's say. And scientists who are interested in the differential reproductive success of high status females compared to low status females started to investigate the possibility that the higher status or dominant females were actively engaging in strategies that undermined the ability of the subordinates to find a mate and to reproduce. Why would they do that? Well, perhaps they do that, psychologically speaking, you might say, just for the sheer sadistic fun of it. But from a broader evolutionary perspective, the purpose is to maximize the probability of their own reproductive success, their own success at finding a mate, and also leaving their genes to propagate into the succeeding generations. How would they do that? The effect of the mechanism of fundamental interest for our...
Can I tell you, I have my own personal story about this. I hadn't... Would I call it evil? Probably. A narcissistic sister-in-law who resented my every pregnancy, and she would cause trouble at every turn in tide, even into the second pregnancy. She tried to convince my ex-husband to have a vasectomy, into saying that, you know what, you've had enough. 2 children is enough. And he nearly went along with it. So there are really some evil queens out there. So I have to agree with Jordan on this.
Purposes, given its psychological significance, is that social stress, often imposed by dominant individuals, can elevate stress hormones, cortisol, for example, in subordinates, disrupting their hormonal cycles and leading to delayed ovulation or reduced fertility. Females use reputation savaging and exclusion, gossip, innuendo, and as I said, social isolation, and those are all.
Oh, can I tell you that this happened? While I was in hospital with my second baby. My husband actually came to the hospital and told me that he was thinking of having a vasectomy due to his sister's advice. And I just burst out crying. So there are people out there like this.
Ways of lowering comparative status. That's what gossip will do, for example, in reputation savaging, whereas exclusion is more directly and intensely stressful.
Probably wasn't enjoying the things that I could enjoy as much as I do now. 3 years ago, I turned 6.
So here's some examples from non-human primates with regard to mechanisms of fertility suppression. For example, in baboons, a particularly aggressive and vicious species, dominant females may physically intimidate subordinates to maintain their reproductive advantage. In species such as marmosets, dominant females actually emit pheromones that directly inhibit ovarian activity in subordinate females, preventing them from cycling or conceiving. By monopolizing food, mates, or safe nesting sites, dominant females limit subordinates' ability to sustain pregnancies or raise offspring, as seen in some tamarin groups. The suppression is often temporary and context dependent, lifting if the subordinate status improves or she leaves the group. The goal is clear: to prioritize the dominant female's offspring by reducing competition for resources and care. Okay, here's some potential examples among human beings. In certain human societies, dominant females, often older women or those with higher social status, exert influence over the reproductive choice of subordinates. Examples include control over marriage. In some cultures, older women, e.g. mothers-in-law, dictate when and whom younger women marry, delaying or restricting their reproductive opportunities. Dominant women may enforce norms that discourage subordinate females from reproducing at certain times, such as stigmatizing early pregnancies or pressuring women to prioritize education or work over family. This social exclusion parallels the stress-induced suppression seen in primates, though it's mediated by culture rather than biology. In modern contexts, dominant females in positions of power, such as corporate leaders or senior academics, may create environments that indirectly suppress the fertility of subordinate women. So here's a thought. One of the things I've wondered about for years, how the radical, progressive, elite feminists can simultaneously criticize capitalism, yet insist that there's no higher priority for young women than to organize their lives around a career. Well, if you want an explanation, fertility suppression by elites with regard to subordinate women foolish enough to listen to such advice certainly constitutes a explanatory hypothesis, and it's a brutal one. Now, with that background firmly in mind, I'm going to read you the original version of Snow White. So, a little background on the Brothers Grimm. Jacob and Wilhelm, they lived Jacob lived from 1785 to 1863, and Wilhelm from 1786 to 1859. They were German scholars and linguists renowned for their collection of fairy tales. Their most famous work, Children's and Household Tales, was first published in 1812, and it included stories that everyone knows, such as Cinderella, Snow White, and Hansel and Gretel. The collection was not a one-time effort. The brothers revised and expanded it over the years, cementing its place as a cultural treasure. They aimed to safeguard German folklore amid a growing interest in national identity. At a time when Germany was a collection of disparate states, the brothers believed that traditional stories reflected the spirit of the German people and preserved their ancient wisdom. As scholars, they saw fairy tales as a lens to explore the evolution of language and narrative, contributing.
I sort of feel sad for my old room. Like, yeah, I wanted to have like a dozen children, but my ex-husband did not feel that way inclined. He was influenced by people around him, and goes to show I didn't meet the soulmate of my life. I never have, and I never will. Keep on going, Jordan. Tell us more.
To their broader academic interests in philology. They gathered stories from diverse sources, including oral tales told by local storytellers, often women, and existing written folklore. Rather than simply recording the tales verbatim, they edited and adapted them to suit their literary style and to appeal to a wider audience, including children. Okay, so a few comments about the Brothers Grimm. It's been a contention of mine for some decades and a cornerstone of my work that our consciousness is structured in the same manner as a story. In fact, I think you can make a very strong case, I believe an incontrovertible case, that what a story is a verbal description of the framing of conscious experience. Now, what that implies at a very deep level is that for diverse individuals to organize themselves into a culture, they have to develop a mechanism such that their consciousness is framed in a similar manner so that they pursue similar goals, they have similar values, and they experience similar emotions. The only way to do that, as far as I can tell, is to provide a foundation of shared narrative. And so the Grimm brothers were.
How does Nutella support biodiversity?
As part of our commitment to the Cocoa and Forest Initiative, we support local.
Particularly perspicacious in their insistence that shared narratives,
which is still, I think, pervasive. Of course it is. A shared narrative dominates society. Keep on going, Jordan.
Define a culture. A culture is a group of people who not only know but inhabit the same stories. Now, it turns out that much of the Brothers Grimm work has provided a foundation for some of the unity of our culture, such as it is. Now, what would you expect folklore passed down from generation to generation, often for periods of time that can exceed 10,000 years? What would you expect such stories to concentrate on? Well, they have to be highly memorable, which means they have to adapt themselves to the structure of human memory. They have to be compelling and interesting. And all of that points to the likelihood that they're describing realities that are unchanging and that are so necessary that their explication automatically grips interest and embeds itself in memory. Okay, so with all that, we can turn to the fairy tale itself. Little Snow White. Once upon a time in the middle of winter, when snowflakes were falling like feathers from the sky, a beautiful queen was sitting and sewing at a window with a black ebony frame. So why a beautiful queen? Well, the same evolutionary psychologists, evolutionary biologists have also done intensive work, and I would refer you in particular to the work of David Buss on outlining the evidence that female beauty in particular, which has a pronounced sexual element, is highly associated with markers of fertility, youth, waist to hip ratio, symmetry of feature, which is a very good indicator, by the way, of underlying genetic integrity. Butterflies, which are quite stunningly beautiful, can detect deviations from symmetry in a potential mate at less than 1 part in a million. And much of the beauty of butterflies is actually a consequence of sexual selection. I saw an amazing butterfly, I don't remember the species, with its wings closed. It looks exactly like a leaf, which is a consequence of natural selection. And then with its wings open, it has the beauty, the colorful beauty and symmetrical patterning and shaping that's characteristic, more characteristic of the typical butterfly. What's the biological significance of beauty? Well, insofar as it's associated with symmetry, for example, it is a marker, as I said, of biological integrity. If there are mishaps during psychophysiological development, one way those mishaps make themselves manifest to perception is in marked deviations from bodily symmetry. Many of the markers that we associate with female beauty and that females compete to make manifest are markers of biological fertility. Waist to hip ratio, which is a stable marker for female attractiveness, with the optimal ratio being 0.68 across cultures. And that's independent, by the way, of body size. So you can have...
Having had an episode of Bell's palsy, and which took me a while back to get my symmetry back in my face, I have to agree. Yeah, I struggled, and which is when my last, probably my last ever partner, looked upon me differently. So yeah, even when I did get back to symmetry, let's keep on going. It's not about me. It's about Snow White.
Women who carry more body fat and women who carry less body fat being equal in terms of their waist to hip ratio attractiveness, as long as it makes itself manifest at approximately 0.68. So the fact that the Queen is beautiful, you see, is directly associated with the issue of fertility and fertility suppression, because the first indication we have of her nature, the nature of her being, is that she's beautiful. And so the simplest explanation for that is young and fertile. A beautiful queen was sitting and sewing at a window with a black ebony frame. As she was sewing and looking out the window at the snow, she pricked her finger with the needle, and 3 drops of blood fell on the snow. The red looked so beautiful on the white snow that she thought to herself, if only I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the window frame. Soon thereafter, she gave birth to a little daughter who was white as snow, as red as blood, and her hair as black as ebony. That's why the child was called Little Snow White. Well, why are those colors relevant? Well, black, white, and red are the 3 colors most likely to be given color names across cultures. And so there are no more directly perceptible colors than black, white, and red. And then red is associated, let's say, with the apple, as we'll see later in the story. But there are, like, reddening of tissue is also associated with both youth and with sexual excitation. And so women, for example, put lipstick on their lips and rouge their cheeks to mimic both youth and fecundity, but also to mimic sexual excitation. The Queen was the most beautiful woman in the entire land. and very proud about her beauty.
I sort of have to disagree with him there. I just use makeup to, not look so old. Oh, wait, is that what he said? I want to look better.
So why do I start things
I'm not attracting
and never
anyone.
finish them?
It's all due to something called law of sustainment.
I'm not attracting fecundity at my age. My goodness, what's he saying?
Shopify powers millions of businesses worldwide, supporting everyone from established brands to entrepreneurs just starting their journey. You can create your professional storefront effortlessly with Shopify's extensive library of customizable templates designed to reflect your...
How many ads do I have to suffer through? What? All right, I'm gonna keep on. Do I want to keep on going with this? We'll see.
Brand's unique identity. Boost your productivity with Shopify's AI-powered tools that craft compelling products, descriptions,
What time do we get rid of it?
engaging headlines, and even enhance your
Please. What's going on?
products, photography, all with just a few clicks. Plus, you can market your business like a pro without hiring a team. Easily develop and launch targeted email campaigns and social media content that reach...
I can't find the... Got it.
customers wherever they spend their time, online or offline. If that's not enough, Shopify offers expert guidance on every aspect of commerce, from inventory management to international shipping logistics to seamless return processing. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period and start selling today at shopify.com/JBP. Go to shopify.com/JBP. Again, that's shopify.com/JBP.
Pride, is the cardinal sin, you might say. It's pride that is the fundamental characteristic of Lucifer, the usurping spirit. You could think of the Luciferian spirit as the individual, or the proclivity of the individual to elevate themselves to the highest possible position. I'll give you an example. When Eve is tempted by the serpent to eat the apple, or the fruit. It's not described as an apple in the Genesis story, but it has become that by tradition, which is relevant to this story. The serpent, who's camouflaged, by the way, like female aggression, tells Eve that if she eats this particular fruit, which means if she consumes it and incorporates it and takes it into herself, becomes it, you might say, that she'll become like God, knowing good and evil. What does that mean? Establishing the moral order. And so Eve eats the fruit offered to her by the serpent so that she can take the place of God and define the moral order. And that's partly why the serpent in the Genesis story becomes associated, as the mythology develops, with Lucifer, the usurping intellect who attempts to take the place of the divine. That's all associated with the idea of pride. Pride is the vice that says, what I want now.
I'm sorry. What's this got to do with apples? All right.
I in the most narrow possible way, or what my whims want now, should be superordinate to all other concerns. The pride that the evil queen takes in her beauty is the taking to herself of a talent that was given to her by providence, let's say, by taking that to herself as a virtue that confers special privileges and benefits on her as an isolated individual. What would the alternative be? She could be extraordinarily grateful for her beauty and self-effacing and kind and self-sacrificing. That would make her the good queen rather than the evil queen. She also had a mirror, and every morning she stepped in front of it and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" the mirror would answer, "You, my queen, are the fairest."
Can I just say, I hate mirrors. Ban all mirrors. I agree with the evil stepmother, step queen. Even though she was beautiful, they do show signs of aging. So ban all mirrors. Ban them all.
First of all, okay, well, what's a mirror? A mirror is a place for self-reflection, but it's also a place of intense self-consciousness, right? When you look in a mirror and you recognize yourself in the mirror, you are self-conscious. In fact, self-recognition in a mirror is a marker used by biologists to determine the presence or absence of self-consciousness in animals. So to look in a mirror is to become self-conscious. Okay, so what's the problem with that? Well, psychologists have known for decades that the experience of self-consciousness is so tightly associated with negative emotion that they're statistically...
Once again, let's ban all mirrors until AI takes them over and shows our 39, well, yeah, let's go back 29-year-old selves. Oh my God, I think I've just hit upon a marketing concept. A mirror upon a wall through AI that shows you the youngest one of you upon the all. Thank you, Jordan.
Indistinguishable. So when the theorists who created the Big Five personality map, five-dimensional personality map, extroversion, neuroticism, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and openness, which is a creativity dimension, when they first laid out that map, they noticed that their statistical inquiries indicated that being self-conscious was so tightly associated with trait neuroticism, which is the proclivity for anxiety, pain, grief, shame, guilt, frustration, disappointment, and anger, among other negative emotions. It was so tightly associated with negative emotion that it was statistically indistinguishable. So we should note that the Queen's pride, in combination with her pronounced proclivity for self-consciousness, is destined to make her miserable, and that the pathway from misery to bitterness, and from bitterness to sadistic, what would you say? Sadistic revenge and envy? That's a very short...
I disagree. I hate the loss of youth. I really do. And I hate looking into a mirror, but I love youth and beauty, and I say positive things to young, gorgeous people all the time, and to everyone. Everyone is gorgeous in their own right. So yeah, I have to disagree with him there. So let's keep on going. Although, I mean, I am a bitter old hag when it comes to some men. Cough, cough. But not in that way. All right.
journey. So, mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all? The mirror would answer, you, my queen, are the fairest of all. So she staked her identity on her beauty. She staked her identity on her youth. She staked her identity on her competitiveness, you might say, in the mating and reproduction market. You know, and that's, I suppose, to some degree, that's developmentally appropriate for a very young woman whose primary, whose primary orientation in the world could well be finding a partner and pursuing the reproductive pathway, having children. worshiping that and developing pride in it, and then maintaining it past its due date.
See, I don't think, like, pertaining to myself, it wasn't a goal as per se. It just happened biologically. It just happened. Was I looking for someone to reproduce with? No way. It just falls into the pattern of life. That's my theory. But hey, I don't have a PhD.
And then using it to suppress fertility in others, especially your own children, that starts to deviate into the pathological. Look, part of the reason that human beings have the lifespan they have, which basically allows us to be grandparents, is that it's useful for young people who are raising children to have their parents around to pass on some wisdom about how to manage this. But it's also the case that it's inappropriate for grandmothers to compete with their daughters on the sexual attractiveness front if that's done in a manner that undermines and supplants the younger woman. So that's all background for this story. You, my queen, are the fairest of all. And then she knew for certain that there was nobody more beautiful in the entire world. However, little Snow White grew up, and when she was 7 years old, she was so beautiful that her beauty surpassed even that of the queen. And when the queen asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" the mirror answered, "You, my queen, may have a beauty quite rare, but little Snow White is 1,000 times more fair." When the queen heard the mirror speak this way, she became pale with envy. And from that hour onward, she hated Snow White. And when she looked at her and thought that little Snow White was to blame, that she, the queen, was no longer the most beautiful woman in the world, her heart turned against little Snow White. Okay, so what's the problem with that? Well, one of the things that you see in pathological families is that the parents who've made a hash of their own life become jealous of the unblemished possibilities and opportunities that lay themselves out in front of their children, and instead of encouraging their development in the world, start to regard the fact that they haven't been corrupted yet by laziness and spite. They start to regard that as they start to regard the contrast between that childhood potentiality and their own wasted and pathological lives as unbearable, and to reduce the contrast instead of straightening the hell up so that they're not embarrassed in front of their children, they discourage their children from moving forward and encourage pathologies in them so that the competitive stress is lessened. And so that's exactly what the evil queen is doing here. She's now jealous of her child instead of stepping back and really taking second place, which is what a wise mother should do and would do.
I feel now that I will never read a fairy tale or a story without critical thinking, and I feel quite sad about that. I'm now going to regard everyone in a suspicious manner. Thanks, Jordan, for destroying my whole childhood. But anyway, let's keep on going.
Do if she had her true interest in mind, but also the interests of her children. You know, one of the tropes in teenage movies is the mom who tries too hard to be cool, let's say, to pretend that she's still young, to even to partake in the social hierarchy structuring of her teenage daughters, let's say, instead of stepping back and letting the young women have their moment, just as she had the opportunity, just as the mother had the opportunity to have her moment. That's part of the sacrificial nature of motherhood when it's undertaken appropriately, right? Because the child becomes the star of the show, let's say, rather than the mother. And the mother isn't trying to become the star through the child either. Her heart turned against little Snow White, right? What did Nietzsche say? We're best punished for our virtues. If you really want to hurt your child, then you find out what's good about them that's embarrassing you by contrast, and then you hurt them for the existence of that good. That'll make you an evil queen. And so what is she like? Well, this is a very harsh part of the story, you see, and this is the sort of thing that modern people find upsetting and perhaps presume shouldn't be shared with children. But the vicious turn this story takes now is an indication of just how absolutely devouring and pathological this evil queen jealousy in relationship to younger women truly is. So this is what the mother of Snow White does to pursue her envy and pride, her usurping capability.
"99% of the success of these trips in the planning phase."
Her jealousy kept upsetting her, and so she summoned her huntsman and said, "Take this child out into the forest," so out into the dark unknown, "to a spot far from her. Then stab her to death." That's bad enough, I would say already. The mother who's going to kill her own child, have her henchman kill her own child. But that's not as bad as it gets. And it's not sufficiently symbolically terrible, because it's like a vampire, right? A vampire is a force of death that feeds on life to keep itself going when really it's already dead. The mother, the queen in this story, doesn't only kill her daughter, she devours her. She attempts to incorporate her own vitality into herself. She's truly the devouring mother, truly the devouring mother. And that's a symbolic representation of maternality gone most pathologically wrong in the opposite direction. I mean, women, mothers, literally nourish their children.
So basically, mothers gone mad. I don't know. MGM.
With their own bodies. Breastfeeding mothers their bodies can detect if their children lack calcium, if their infants lack calcium when they're breastfeeding, through receptors in the nipple. And if the child is lacking calcium, the mother will decalcify her own bones, take calcium out of her own bones to increase the proportion of calcium in the milk to feed to her child. And so the proper maternal orientation towards infants in particular, but also children, is voluntary self-sacrifice, right? The mother gives herself up, gives herself over to the child. This is a complete inversion of that, where the mother becomes the devouring agent and the child is nourishment for the pathologies of the mother. You see plenty of that, by the way, in the modern world with mothers, for example, who utilize their demented identity politics with regards to their children. My boy is really a girl. My girl is really a boy. There's some fertility suppression. And use the notoriety generated by that pathologization of the child to elevate their social status among their idiot friends at the cost of the child's happiness, physiology, and future reproductive success. So no matter how brutal this story becomes, and that's what happens next, it pales in comparison to the truth of the pathology of the devouring mother. Take the child out into the forest to a spot far from here, then stab her to death, and bring me back her lungs and liver as proof of your deed. Lungs, that's inspiration, that's respiration, that's the resting place of the spirit. Liver, well, think of the word live. The liver is the part of the body, the vital organ that can regenerate itself and is regarded symbolically as the seat of vitality. So it's spirit and vitality that the evil queen devours in consequence of her jealousy, her inappropriate.
I sort of see it as, was organ trafficking way back then? Oh my goodness, no, they would not have known what to do with it. Oh my goodness. Did they eat it? That's horrible.
Jealousy of the benefits of Snow White's youth. After that, I'll cook them with salt and eat them. Now you think, do you tell your children that story? And that's a hard question, because one thing you want to do if you have children is protect them from the evil queen. The huntsman took little Snow White and led her out into the forest, but when he drew his hunting knife and was about to stab her, she began to weep and pleaded so much to let her live, and promised never to return, but to run deeper into the forest. The huntsman was moved to pity, also because she was so beautiful. Anyway, he thought the wild beasts in the forest would soon devour her. I'm glad that I won't have to kill her, he thought. Just then a young boar came dashing by, and the huntsman stabbed it to death. He took out the lungs and liver and brought them to the queen as proof that the child was dead. Then she boiled them in salt, ate them, and thought she had eaten little Snow White's lungs and liver. So that's pretty damn rough, but now you understand its significance. Oh, this reminds me, of the Disney version of Sleeping Beauty. Remember the evil queen in Sleeping Beauty, Maleficent, entraps the prince in a castle, and her goal is to keep him locked up until he's so old that he can't find a mate and reproduce, right? And when he dares to challenge her, she turns into the dragon that devours everything, right? Into the full bloody fury of nature itself in all its predatory catastrophe. And he defeats her with a cross on his shield and the sword of truth, and advances through the thorns that she's placed around Sleeping Beauty.
And that is what inspired the maker of Viagra. Sorry, I'm just joking.
So that he can find the princess. And that's the story of the young man's heroic rejection of the destruction of his life, possibility, and youth by the evil queen. Meanwhile, little Snow White was so all alone in the huge forest that she became afraid and began to run over sharp stones and through thorn bushes. This is a typical fairy tale motif, and the emphasis of the story here actually shifts to Snow White because it starts to become a developmental story rather than a story about the evil queen.
Bet you've never seen a green roof house making these kind of numbers. Let's check it out. So this property is up for sale for about $429,000.
So Snow White has been moved from pathological order, and that's the domain ruled by the evil queen, out into the unknown. Those two things are conflated, you might say, because whenever you are in a situation where you are encountering the unknown, for example, when you're lost in a forest, when you're away from everything that brings you security and familiarity, you are in the unknown, in unexplored territory, but that unexplored territory is going to be populated by the monsters of your imagination. And so any journey into the unknown is simultaneously a journey into the unconscious. So what's happening here is that Snow White has left security and is now encountering the unknown. And that's part of the developmental trajectory. Everything we learn is on the border of order and chaos. Everything we learn is a step into the unknown. And so this is a radical initiation for Snow White. She ran the entire day. Finally, as the sun was about to set, she came upon a little cottage that belonged to 7 dwarfs. Now, this is very interesting. So Snow White has gone, you could say, into the unknown or into the unconscious, and quite deeply, because it takes her a whole day to get there. And what does she discover? So this is in her own mind, you might say. This is part of the landscape of possibility that presents itself to any young woman who is being persecuted by the forces of the evil queen. Down deep into the unknown, down deep into the unconscious. Go far enough, you find the home of the dwarves. Okay, so what are the dwarves here? The dwarves are ordinary, faceless, hardworking men. Now, in the modern Snow White story, this last travesty that Disney so catastrophically produced, the dwarfs are basically a mess. And that's part of the pathology of the modern world, which assumes that typical, faceless, ordinary, hardworking.
See, I found another version from a guy that says, oh, right. Let's keep on going with Jordan's version of it. I do agree with him on some points, but yeah, not on this.
Working men are part of the pathological patriarchy and incapable of taking care of themselves. That's not the case in the Grimm brothers' story. The dwarves have a perfectly functional house deep in the woods, and they're capable of taking care of themselves. In fact, you might think about the dwarves as exactly that. The dwarves are 7 ordinary, hardworking men who've made a place in the forest of the unknown that's safe and secure and functional. And so you could think about the dwarves as indicators, as representatives of the ordinary, functional patriarchy. Now, what's particularly interesting about that, you see, is that Snow White finds respite from the evil queen in the dwelling place of the ordinary man. So what does that mean? Well, it means that one of the things that ordinary men offer young women is protection from the pathology of fertility suppression by toxic older women. And given the absolute widespread pervasiveness of elite-induced fertility suppression in our culture, the notion that an alliance between young women and ordinary men is the...
So I solemnly vow, as an older woman, never to suppress any young woman's fertility. I shall go out there now and encourage everyone. Have children. Have as many as you want. I've always been pro-children, so yeah. Have as many as you can afford, or can't afford, or just... If you don't want children, don't have them. But if you want children, have them. Just be true to yourself. Jordan's going a bit deep into this, but anyway.
Protection against that fertility and youth destroying pathology is a lesson well worth learning, and certainly not the lesson that was put forward in the most recent version of the Snow White narrative. So she ran the entire day. Finally, as the sun was about to set, she came upon a little cottage that belonged to 7 dwarfs. Okay, so that happens at night too, so that's deeper into the unconscious. However, they were not at home, but had gone to the mines. See, as miners, you see, they descend into the depths themselves, and they find, through their labor, treasure. And so the dwarves, you see this in mythological representations of dwarves, like in the Lord of the Rings. The dwarves are often heroes. They're tough little guys, and they go into the darkest recesses of the bowels of the earth to find the glittering treasure. And so it's very appropriate to notice that these dwarfs are good men. They're still dwarfs, however. They were not at home, but had gone to the mines. Okay, so they're also diligent, conscientious, and hardworking. And that's reinforced by the next line. When little Snow White entered, she found everything tiny, but dainty and neat. Okay, so this is a well-tended place, right? So these are lone men who are capable of taking care of themselves and establishing habitable order, habitable patriarchal order, cooperative, conscientious, oriented towards the treasure, brave and resolute. There was a little table with a white tablecloth and 7 little plates with 7 tiny spoons, 7 tiny knives and tiny forks, and 7 tiny cups. In a row against the wall stood 7 little beds, recently covered with sheets. So their beds are made too. Take note, all of you who have unmade beds and still are struggling even to be dwarves. Since she was so hungry and thirsty, so now she gets to eat in this place of masculine provision. Snow White ate some vegetables and bread from each of the little plates and had a drop of wine to drink out of each of the tiny cups. And since she was so tired, she wanted to lay down and sleep. So she began trying out the beds, but none of them suited her until she found that the 7th one was just right. So she lay down in it and fell asleep. When it turned night, the 7 dwarves returned home from their work and lit their 7 little candles. Then they saw that someone had been in their house. The first dwarf said, "Who's been sitting in my chair?" "Who's eaten off my plate?" said the second. "Who's eaten some of my bread?" said the third. "My vegetables," said the fourth. "Who's been using my little fork?" said the fifth. "Who's been cutting with my little knife?" said the sixth. "Who's had something to drink from my little cup?" said the seventh. Then the first dwarf looked around and said, "Who's been sleeping in my bed?" The second cried out, "Someone's been sleeping in my bed." And he was followed by each of them, until the 7th dwarf looked at his bed and saw little Snow White lying there asleep. The others came running over to him, and they were so astounded that they screamed and fetched their 7 little candles to observe little Snow White. "Oh, my lord," they explained, "how beautiful she is. They took great delight in her." Okay, well, that's actually an indication that these are pretty decent little dwarfs too, because if they were as pathological as the little queen and they came across a attractive juvenile female, God only knows what hell could break loose, as we've seen repeatedly in places like the UK, for example.
How does Nutella ensure the quality of its ingredients?
Nutella has established high-quality standards for every ingredient, thanks to close...
So the dwarves are protective of Snow White and her beauty and serve a proper paternal and partnership function. They took great delight in her, but didn't wake her up. They let her sleep in the bed. So that's very generous of them. They're very hospitable, which also indicates their essential morality. Well, the 7th dwarf spent an hour in each one of his companions' bed until the night had passed. When she awoke, they asked her who she was and how she had managed to come to their cottage. Then she told them how her mother had wanted to have her killed, how the huntsman had spared her life, and how she had run all day until she had eventually arrived at the cottage. Then the dwarfs took pity on her and said, "If you'll keep house for us, cook, sew, make the beds, wash and knit, and if you'll keep everything neat and orderly, you can stay with us, and we'll provide you with everything you need. When we come home in the evening, dinner must be ready. During the day, we're in the mines and dig for gold. You'll be alone. We'll have to watch out for the queen and not let anyone enter the cottage." Okay, so what's the deal here? Well, Snow White has run from the destructive force of her evil mother and the most pathological element of nature and plunged deep into the unknown, where she found the dwarfs who are emblematic of the stable patriarchy. The stable, ordinary, productive patriarchy. Now, the deal for her is that she has to serve the dwarfs and they'll protect her from the evil queen. So that's a pretty good deal, given that the evil queen wants to eat her lungs and her liver, so is posing a mortal threat. And it's indicative of the notion that prior to finding a prince, you might say, and finding permanent protection from the evil queen in the form of a stable, long-term, desirable partnership, a marriage, the young woman threatened by the evil queen, which is the eternal archetypal situation of isolated young women, has to make a pact to serve ordinary masculinity, right? To partner with ordinary masculinity, to have respect for it, to understand its productive function, and to know that It's ordinary masculinity, you might say, that stops female pathology from making itself manifest as the ultimately destructive force it can all too easily become. Right. So what's the moral of the story as we proceed? If you want to find a prince and escape from the evil queen, you have to serve the dwarfs with some degree of gratitude and conscientious dedication. Right. With some real emphasis on gratitude. And why? Well, better the dwarves than the evil queen, right? Which is exactly the opposite of the feminist narrative, which is that there are only power-mad, pathological men, and all that's feminine is benevolent. It's like, yeah, right. God. In the meantime, the queen believed that she was once again the most beautiful woman in the land, and stepped before her mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" The mirror answered, "You, my queen, have a beauty quite rare, but beyond the 7 mountains, this I must tell. Little Snow White is living quite well. Indeed, she's still 1,000 times more fair." So what does this mean for the poor queen? Well, you know, at one level of analysis, the queen is battling against her own daughter. But at a different level of analysis, the aging woman is battling against youth itself. And even if she does manage to destroy her own child so happily, sadistically, and delightfully, with envy and spite making themselves manifest as primary motivations aligned with pride, let's say, even if she manages that, she's not going to win the ultimate battle, because age is always supplanted by youth. No, reproduction is a young woman's game. And so it's less intense for men, although men are more fertile when they're younger. But for women, youth and reproduction are intensely associated. And the battle of the aging woman against her own daughter is a microcosm of the battle of age against youth. And on the fertility front, let's say the sexual attractiveness front as well, to a large degree, at least the natural sexual attractiveness front, the evil queen is not going to be able to stamp out youth itself. Although, you know, in cultures where the old women cover all the young women up so that you can't even see their eyes,
he hasn't factored in granny grabbers. There's a whole culture of young men out there that like granny grabbers.
Vicious battle of envious age in women against the beauty and attractiveness of young women has been taken to a staggering extreme. I suppose most thoroughly made manifest in the absolutely brutal practice of female genital mutilation, which is also, by the way, often undertaken by grandmothers. When the queen heard this, her mirror's objection, she was horrified, for she saw that she had been deceived and that the huntsman had not killed little Snow White. Since nobody but the 7 dwarfs lived in the 7 mountains region, the queen immediately knew that little Snow White was dwelling with them and began once again plotting ways to kill her.
All right, so it plugs it in. Perfect. We'll start the car. I need a tap to begin the scan. Now my $2,000.
As long as the mirror refused to say that she was the most beautiful woman in the land, she would remain upset. Since she couldn't be absolutely certain and didn't trust anyone, she disguised herself as an old peddler woman, painted her face so that nobody could recognize her, and went to the cottage of the 7 dwarfs, where she knocked at the door.
See, if I had a magic mirror, I'd just like it to say, "Okay, look alright. Just go face the day. You're old. Just accept it. Move on. Put a little bit of makeup on. Don't look so washed out. You'll do." You can't fight it.
and cried out, open up, I'm the old peddler woman. I've got pretty wares for sale. Little Snow White looked out the window. What do you have for sale? Stay laces, dear child. That's a corset. It's a corset. The old woman replied and took out a lace woven from yellow, red, and blue silk. Do you want it? Well, yes, said Little Snow White. If I remember correctly, women spend 80% of the consumer dollar. It's a very interesting statistic. So men might have an advantage on the earning side, slight. It's about 8%, something like that. And that has virtually nothing to do with prejudice against women, by the way, if the statistics are calculated properly. But women have a marked advantage on the spending side, and it's a real toss-up. Who has more power? The people who make the money or the people who spend it? In any case, Snow White is interested in shopping, and so the old peddler woman has some wares for her. Now, she lets her inside. Well, yes, do you want it? Well, yes, said Little Snow White, thought, I can certainly let her. This good old woman inside, she's honest enough. What does she think? She just wants to make me beautiful. She just wants to do something for me. Okay, so Little Snow White unbolted the door and bought the lace. My goodness, you're so sloppily laced up, said the old woman. Come on, I'll lace you up properly for once. Little Snow White stood in front of the old woman, who took the lace and tied it around Little Snow White so tightly that she lost her breath and fell down as if dead. Then the queen was satisfied and left. Well, let's think about a corset for a minute. And so, the feminist scuttlebutt is that the Victorian proclivity to use corsets was a imposition of the masculine superstructure, but women compete with one another to make manifest their signs of beauty and fertility, and don't need men to intercede to make that happen. Now, it was the case that in Victorian England, corset use could become so extreme that it interfered with breathing and sometimes even caused death. So what does that point to at a deeper level? The evil queen, it's so awful, the evil queen entices Snow White to maximize her attractiveness in a manner that compromises not only her health, but her life. And that's, if you can't see that playing out in our society at the moment, then you're not paying attention. Some of you might be familiar with Bonnie Blue, the prostitute in the UK who's had sex with 100 men in one night and is now attempting 1,000, apparently. Her mother is her business manager. And if you think that's all right, and you're female, well, then you're definitely the evil queen. And if you think that's all right and you're male, you're not even a dwarf. And so you can give that some consideration. Little Snow White stood in front of the old woman who took the lace and tied it around Little Snow White so tightly that she lost her breath and fell down as if dead. Then the queen was satisfied and left. So that's a very sophisticated method of fertility suppression. Entice young women into advertising themselves sexually so brutally and in such an all-consuming manner that it interferes with spirit, that's breath, and life itself. Jesus, brutal. Not long after nightfall, the dwarfs came home. And when they saw their dear Snow White lying on the ground, they were horrified, for she seemed to be dead. They lifted her up, and when they saw that she was laced too tightly, they cut the stay lace in two. So it's the men, it's the dwarfs that rescue Snow White from the pathologization of her own sexuality. Right, it's not the bloody dwarfs who put her in the corset and make it impossible for her to breathe. It's her own mother, her own evil mother. Right. At once, she began to breathe a little, and after a while, she had fully revived. So the dwarfs, with their essential, ordinary, conscientious, masculine sensibility are able to protect Snow White against the pathologization of her own sexual attractiveness at the hands of the evil queen. Right, so the dwarfs can manage that. That was nobody else but the queen, they said. Pay attention to the dwarfs. It's not us. It's your evil mother. She wanted to take your life. Be careful. And don't let anyone else enter the cottage. Now the queen asked her mirror, mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all? The mirror answered, you, my queen, may have a beauty quite rare, but little Snow White's alive. This I must tell. She's with the dwarfs and doing quite well. Indeed, she's still 1,000 times more fair.
Your doctor tells you your thyroid test came back fine. So why did you feel half dead every morning? Did you know your
The queen was so horrified that all her blood rushed to her heart when she realized that little Snow White was alive once again. So she began thinking day and night how she could put an end to little Snow White. Finally, she made a poisoned comb, disguised herself in a completely different shape, and went off to the dwarf's cottage once again. When she knocked on the door, however, little Snow White called out, I'm not allowed to let anyone enter. The queen then took out the comb. So now Snow White, you see, Snow White gets enticed in some ways by her own vanity, right? Now the dwarfs have told her, be careful who you let in, right? Remember in the story of Cain and Abel, that when Cain becomes possessed by envy, in consequence of the failure of his own second-rate sacrifices, he invites the spirit of murderous sin in to possess him as a voluntary response to his own pathological inadequacy. Pathological and voluntary inadequacy. He has to invite the pathological agent in. And that's what Snow White does, right? She does that because she wants first the lace stay and then the comb. And so she's enticed by the opportunity to make the most of her own beauty, which is an understandable motivation. She's enticed by that motivation to hearken to the voice of the evil and destructive queen. So that's a morality tale about the danger of vanity. Right. When little Snow White saw it shine, the comb, so it's a shiny comb, right? It's glittery, it's numinous in Rudolf Otto's phrase. It attracts her attention. And so I suppose that's why the queen brought the comb. When little Snow White saw it shine, so it's a phenomenon. Phenomenon, that's a word from the Greek root, phanesthai. Phanesthai means to shine forth. Something that shines attracts your attention, right? And things attract your attention because they what? They speak to a conscious or unconscious motivational force. So Snow White would like to make use of her beauty. And fair enough, but there's great danger in making use of your beauty. Come, said the peddler woman. When little Snow White saw it shine and that the woman was someone entirely different from the one she had previously met, yeah, she was entirely different on the surface. So there's different manifestations of the evil queen pathology, all selling something hypothetically different, but they're all avatars of the same underlying pathological, fertility-suppressing, devouring dragon force. When she saw that the woman was someone entirely different from the one she had previously met, she opened the door and bought the comb. Come, said the peddler woman, I'll also comb your hair. How she's so thoughtful and helpful. Right, so you see, that's part of that camouflaged pathology. The little peddler, the peddler woman to begin with, who has the lace stays, offers to lace Snow White up properly and then to comb her hair. And so she's disguising her murderously destructive, reproductive, savaging pathology in a show of maternal compassion. Brutal, brutal. But no sooner did the old woman stick the comb in little Snow White's hair than the maiden fell down and was dead. Now you'll remain lying there, the queen said, and her heart had become lighter as she returned home. However, the dwarfs came just in the nick of time. when they saw what had happened, they pulled the poison comb out of little Snow White's hair, and she opened her eyes and was alive again. Okay, so that's the second time this is insisted upon in this fairy tale, right? The dwarves are not the masculine patriarchal force of the ordinary society of men who entice young women to become pathologized in pursuit of beauty. In fact, they're the force that protects themselves against the intense female competition that tilts that struggling for supremacy in beauty and attractiveness in a spirit-destroying and murderous direction. So that's why it's so important for Snow White to learn to serve the dwarfs, to be grateful for them, and to be able to establish a relationship of mutuality with ordinary masculinity, right? And this is as a precursor to meeting the prince, right? And so you might say, well, a woman who's indefinitely proud, particularly of her own attractiveness, might have nothing but contempt for the dwarfs. But what this story indicates is that she'll be vulnerable beyond belief to the machinations of the evil queen in consequence. And without that ability to be grateful to ordinary masculinity, the prince will never make his appearance.
The U.S. government just passed a new law that could trigger a massive economic shift and impact every checking and savings account in America.
And so why would the best of men make an appearance in a woman's life if the woman was pathologically incapable of having any respect whatsoever or offering any service in return for protection to masculinity as such? That's something worth thinking about in a time when gratitude for the benevolent element of the patriarchy is sorely lacking. The dwarfs came just in the nick of time. When they saw what had happened, they pulled the poison comb out of little Snow White's hair, and she was alive again. She promised the dwarfs that she would certainly not let anyone inside again. Okay, so, they tell Snow White a number of times, but she's really too immature and too easily tempted, both of those, to protect herself against a force as pathological as the evil queen. And so that's worth thinking about too. It's too much to ask a truly young woman to make the wisdom manifest that would be necessary for her to see through the disguises of the evil queen and her proclivity to use temptation in service of murderous pathology. It's too much to ask that a young woman will be wise enough on her own to protect herself from the poison gifts of the evil queen. Right. She needs the intermediary of the dwarfs. And so, well, that would be, for the typical young woman, that would be the protective phalanx of her brothers and her father. Now the queen stepped in front of her mirror once more and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" The mirror answered, "You, my queen, may have a beauty quite rare, but little Snow White's alive. This I must tell. She's with the dwarfs and doing quite well. Indeed, she's still 1,000 times more fair." When the queen heard this once again, she trembled and shook with rage. "Little Snow White shall die," she exclaimed, "even if it costs me my own life." Yeah, well, that's an enemy that's pretty hard to stand up against, someone who will light themselves on fire just to singe you. And if you don't think people are capable of that kind of hatred at all cost, then you don't know much about human psychopathology. Those people who shoot up schools and then commit suicide when they could just as easily do things in the reverse order and save everyone a lot of trouble. It's like they're capping off of their murderous rage with their own self-destruction is actually part of the art. They know perfectly well that even if their motivation is suicidal, that the biggest manifestation of resentment and spite with regards to the structure of reality and their fellow man and their own spirit and God himself is to create the maximum amount of mayhem possible in the most viciously sadistic way, and to cap that off with a demonstration that even their own life is worth nothing, especially in relationship to their desire for revenge and their capacity for spite. Then she went into a secret chamber where no one was allowed to enter. So this is like the heart of her poison, right? So the bodice was one thing, the stays, the corset. The poison comb was another. This gets to the heart of the matter. She goes to where the most genuine evil is made manifest. Once inside, she made a deadly poisonous apple. Well, why an apple? Well, an apple is the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? The apple is the thing that you incorporate that changes you. The apple is information. The apple is education. The apple is ideology. The apple is an idea rather than an artifact, right? That's what it's symbolic of. That's what it represents. And so the first kinds of poison or death that the pathological evil queen attempts to administer to Snow White are pretty straightforward and basic, right? They're appeals to her own vanity in the form of pathologization of her attractiveness. But this is a deeper form of poison, right? It's a poison that strikes right to the soul. Remember, it's the consuming of the apple that is the original sin that knocks Adam and Eve out of paradise. The poisoned apple is, what is it? It's pathological knowledge, right? I think it's exactly the same as the symbolic representation of the kind of evil doctrine that young women are fed by jealous, miserable, single, bitter, envious, resentful old women to knock them out of the mating game, partly to reduce competition and partly just out of self-destructive spite. A deadly poisonous apple. On the outside, it looked beautiful with red cheeks, right? Red cheeks. So the apple is red cheeks. It's emblematic of health itself, of flourishing health, right? If you wanted to be a healthy young woman, this is obviously the apple that you would eat. And that's exactly what young women are taught in today's universities, right? To pursue that path of career that now has left the prioritization of self-interest. It's not precisely career. The prioritization of narrow self-interest that compromises their youth and leaves 50% of women in the West childless at the age of 30, with the probability that 90% of them will regret that as the years pass by. Apple, beautiful with red cheeks. Anyone who saw it would be enticed to take a bite. Well, so this is propaganda in its most attractive form. It's like, well, if this is what you were offered, of course you'd take it. It sounds like you could have it all. Young women, you can have it all. Yeah, well, the question is, who's offering that particular apple and what exactly is their motivation? We're just looking out for our younger sisters. It's like, yeah, maybe you're looking out for them and maybe you're a manifestation of the evil queen whose fundamental motivation is to devour their liver and lungs.
If you knew exactly what to sell, who to sell to, and how to launch, you can genuinely be up and running with your own online business. And that is exactly what Secrets of the Modern Wealthy is for. You get the book, a 7-day fast start series, a really clever AI tool to help you shape your offer, your business model, and an absolute buzzing community right now to keep you accountable. Now, here's the best part. It's just $6.99. That's in US dollars. It's less in pounds and euros, whilst we're building out case studies for our brand new AI platform. If you want to learn more, just click the link where you can read all about it.
There you go.
So why do I start things and never finish them?
It's all due to some